The first immediate critique of charity organizations is that they're mitigation techniques. Charity is bad because its existence is a byproduct of the system. Mutual aid doesn't resolve anything, and helping people with a political agenda is unethical. Food banks shouldn't exist. The failures of our current system are clear, and while I do enjoy engaging in that conversation from time to time, more often than not it's used as a means of diminishing the efforts of people. There are meaningful critiques that can be relayed about any form of mitigation tactic, but the spectrum on how conducive that discussion is ultimately depends on the tactic being employed.
You want me to save those kids in a place like this? Damn. Back yourself into a corner. Figure this out!
I used to work in a charity as a graphic designer, and in doing so I learned quite a few bits and pieces about how that process works behind the scenes. For starters, there's a little thing called incentive and investors. Charities often rebrand themselves and change their causes depending on what their investors and potential funders have to say. I won't get too into the specifics here, but what I will say is, it's more common than you think. I remember being told I had to design some changes to our website and logos on the short notice because of these potential investors. These guys, they have more impact on the ethos and actions of these charities than you think. And cause if you don't get funding, you can't do anything, right? You can't help nobody, right? Some of the elements charity organizations prioritize also seem kind of questionable to me, to be blunt, like financial literacy in BAME communities. BAME is a term in the UK that stands for Black, Asian, Minority Ethnic Groups. So first and foremost, we have to ask the scary question, why is financial literacy what we're pushing for on marginalized groups, as opposed to helping them with tangible goods, supplies, and, resources? The big advantage of charity is that it's easy. And I don't say that to dismiss it. I mean that to communicate that it's genuinely the easier alternative. Charities are everywhere. Non-profit organizations, what have you. But it's still a business model. And that disconnect between you and the cause you're supporting feels really vast. It's not, there's definitely like a disconnect there. There's no tangible way to see where your money is going, who it's impacting, and the effect it's had. Depending on what the charity is about, the most you're gonna get is an orchestrated picture for social media points. I'll never fault anyone for donating to charities that claim to help people. I've done it. But the ease of charity compared to the alternatives is by design. It's just something to keep in mind. Mutual aid has a large history surrounding it, but not one that's particularly worth getting into right now. I think St. Andrew made a really great video surrounding that. Mutual aid is different from charities in that they aren't investors. You're held accountable by your own community, and the goal is to meet the needs of the community. The difference is, a charity could be based wherever and be providing blankets for the poor, but in reality, those people are asking for food. It requires you to directly engage with your community and meet their respective needs. Mutual aid is generally perceived as more difficult because of this. I know, speaking from experience, I don't really have a strong relationship with my neighbors. One is an old white family and one is a relatively young Caribbean family. Outside some miscellaneous highs and buys, we don't really interact that much. And if I came knocking down doors, talk about unifying the community and helping out, I don't think the response would be I don't really think the response would be a resounding yes. And I'd like to imagine, or I wouldn't like to imagine, I guess, right? And generally, I would imagine it's the same for a lot of people. If you came knocking down, talking about unifying the community and helping out, I don't think the response would be a resounding yes. It's easy to get caught up in the belief that mutual aid has no practicality. As saying it up almost feels very circumstantial and, well, difficult. But I wouldn't go that far. I think, and regardless of your opinions on the institution, the church is one of the best examples of this. I made the joke once before that the church is a building fund and offering and tithe and Thanksgiving offering. I'm trying. But every now and again, someone would show up to the church and ask for help, financially, whether they couldn't pay for a bill or needed money for travel or whatever. And we'd all contribute some money to help them out. Now, they didn't have to stay in the church. In fact, most times they didn't. But it does communicate that the church was, at the very least, a cornerstone institution that took care of those in need. Now, obviously, it's a bunch of politics to get involved in with that, but ultimately, the church is there for people in their hour of need. That's a community effort, right? And that's a practical example of mutual aid. I know my aunt has only been in the country for 4 to 5 years now, and early on it's really hard to find a place to fit in and who to talk to. She goes to church and bang, that's her space. It clicks instantly. Now, I'm not about to lecture you about the power of God or whatever, right? But I'm just trying to communicate to you that how that sense of community and that support system can not only help people, but that's like one of the more overt ways it's manifested in the modern day. Like, churches were once used as the foundation for a lot of organizers and community efforts during the civil rights movement. And for the time period, it's easy to see how and why. For the time period. Charity is easier, but there's a lot more institutional barriers, investors, etc. It lacks the political agendas, but often covertly has them anyway. It has a wide range of options, but there's a very clear disconnect between you and the people you're helping. You don't know where your money is actually going. Mutual aid is harder, but there's a greater sense of community. It requires you to be held accountable by your community. There's a political agenda, but it's overt and they'll help you regardless. Setting them up is difficult, however, and even if you find one, the likelihood of it reflecting your values isn't always guaranteed. But the truth of the matter is, there's an amalgamation of political shit going on behind the scenes at charities, so the difference to me is more so one is transparent about its agenda and the other isn't. Charity, for all its value, is palatable because it presents itself as depoliticized. Mutual aid, generally speaking, is the opposite. Dual power is this term that BSA uses a lot, but it's this idea of building alternatives to the institutions we currently use. Public schools are racist, we build our own schools. Bad healthcare, we make our own healthcare clinic, so on and so forth. I believe the Black Panther Party made their own school, and people said that it was one of the best academic experiences they'd ever experienced, right? Again, things to keep in mind. Mutual aid encourages alternatives to the system, while charity is a byproduct of its existence. For the record, this isn't to devalue one over the other. I'm not going to roll my eyes if you do a charity event or if your mutual aid initiative doesn't politically align with my stuff, right? Ultimately, most of the people involved in these things just want to help. Most of them. And I'm not going to police how you manifest that. I just think it's interesting to think about. Why am I communicating all of this? Well, to the surprise of no one following this channel, ever since I hit 50k, I started to feel like a weird sense of guilt. Not because I don't believe in what I'm saying, but because ultimately, even if it's just a little, I'm essentially profiting off all of it. Like, I'm still broke, like even in viewership, subscribers, opportunities for sponsorships, whatever. And no matter how much I'm told my content has value, I still don't really feel the value in it. It's why I've been so self-destructive recently. Even the fact that I did my first sponsor recently, it wasn't because they paid well, because to be blunt, they didn't. It was to paint a picture about my last video and how ridiculously easy it would be. Make Boondocks videos, they perform the best. Stray away from overt politics, sponsors genuinely don't like it. It'd be easy, it'd be simple. Another thing communicated to me a lot is just get the bag, collect the bag, get your money. It's so common. It's so common that even my viewership encourages it. Because every time someone gets really big speaking about these issues, that's all they do, collect the bag. How much can I even truly fault my audience for having that perspective? When time after time someone blows up, whether it's someone left-leaning, leftist or whatever, that's all they do. How can you expect more when the bar is so low? These self-destructive thoughts, my complicated thoughts to the position of influence, and the question of whether or not I'm doing enough. There were already things on my mind. This is a slightly more personal thing, but a lot of the people around me have recently been struggling. I watched my family grapple with funeral costs for their relatives. More recently, a close friend of mine called me up about his mother dying, and as someone that's gone through that, it's rough. It's really rough. There's no rosy way to paint that, right? And it was one of the first times where someone had contacted me to confide in me, and I felt powerless. Not because I couldn't empathize, but because I didn't have the money or resources to even help him. All of these things started to build up. They were building up inside me, and it led me to make this decision. I'm starting a food bank initiative on the channel. I call it the Free Huey Food Bank Initiative. Very, very creative, I know. This has been in development for literally months now. It's genuinely been forever. Collaboration's been falling through, what have you, but finally I can talk about it. I can finally talk about this. This is a thing. I can do it. There are multiple things I need to establish before we start this. 1, where is it based? The Food Bank Initiative is based in Peckham. I've volunteered at the food bank before and I trust it. Peckham is like home to me because without baiting out where I live, my school was right next to Peckham, and I spent a majority of my time after school there, even now. I could make a whole video on Peckham and like the stuff going on there, but that's maybe for another day, right? The initiative is very simple. Every month I'm giving a list of shopping supplies by the community. This isn't limited to food, but we'll get into that in a second. But it's generally just the needs of the people. These supplies are packaged with a book of my audience's choosing, but again, more on that later. See, I've been speaking to a lot more organizers over the past year, watching that conversation unfold. A criticism I've seen lodged at No Name's library is essentially that libraries being racist institutions, promoting elitism, and how a book isn't exactly going to help poor black people. And while I don't agree with all of these criticisms, the ultimate sentiment that you can't just throw theory at people and claim to be helping a community is one I agree with. Because contrary to what online spaces would have you believe, people have tangible needs that aren't resolved through some bits on a Twitch stream, or through like a super chat donation. I think books are important, but nobody's gonna learn anything on an empty stomach. But also, giving people access to these resources is equally helpful. So the goal is, I'm doing both. Two, is it only food you're providing? Good question. No. The shopping list often includes things like shower gel, toothpaste, towels, the general basic necessities. And while it's being branded, massive air quotes there, as a food bank initiative, it's really down to whatever the community is asking for at the time. 3. Accountability. This is a big one because it's very easy to not be transparent about these things. I had my Patreon account and no one really has to hold me accountable for it. Umar shouting donations. I don't really see anything. I'll get into the habit of posting receipts and videos on the process on my Patreon and in YouTube Shorts. It's not perfect, but again, there's a reason. Another thing I realized talking to organizers is, believe it or not, taking a performative taking a performative photograph in front of people struggling under the system, believe it or not, is difficult. Right? It's weird, it's unethical, and it makes a spectacle of their suffering for social media points. It's why most organizers, you don't know their names. It's not this sensational act that's represented on social media, but if you ask the community in the right spaces, their names are there. 4. What book gets chosen? Alright, so this is where my community comes in. If you support the Food Bank Initiative on Patreon, you get to vote on which book gets packaged with the resources. This month, in the spirit of the last video, I wanted it to be the autobiography of Malcolm X. But if you guys have any other suggestions, feel free to leave them. The only rule I have on this is to keep it black. Like, Marx is bland, I'm not trying to do any white leftist theorist people. But like, okay, for instance, like Walter Rodney, like that's okay. Like that kind of thing. 5, what's the goal? Like what's the ultimate goal here? I want to help my community, the community around me. I brought up those uncomfortable experiences before because I constantly feel like I'm not doing enough. And I don't have the resources to do more. And every time I open my mouth about this, it's like someone holds a gun to my face and says, what are you going to do? Shut up and collect the bag. And if that's all we've been conditioned to expect from these quote-unquote leftist influencers, then I do want to help change that, even if it inconveniences me. This won't dismantle the system. This is categorically mitigation. I'm aware of that. But this is all I can do, at least for now. So if you believe in that vision, if you want to support the food bank, the link is in the description. We pray that tomorrow will be better than today. Power to the people. Peace.